Good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Higgins.
I'm Marcus Neubacher with the North Carolina Transportation Museum.
And I've been looking forward to doing an interview with you guys because I'm a huge fan of the North Carolina Transportation Museum. When I was living down in North Carolina, I visited there frequently, being about 15 minutes from the 20 minutes from the museum. Of course, there is lots of railroad stuff at the museum, but it also has so much more. Marcus, from what I understand, you have a slideshow presentation you want to share with
Yeah,
us?
I do. I have some information about the slideshow and or about the whole museum in a slideshow here. Just kind of an overview of where we've come from, who we are, and what we do. And you mentioned that it is a transportation museum. I'm the director of administration for the nonprofit group that supports the museum. The museum itself is a state-funded, is a state facility, but about 90% or more of the annual budget and funding and everything comes from the activities that we do, and that's admissions and special events and just various fundraising, gift shop, train rides, and all of that. So, although it is a state facility, less than 10% of it actually comes from state appropriated money, which is why it's so important for people to come out and enjoy the museum and for us to put on a good show whenever we can there. So we very much enjoy doing that. So I thought I'd go through a few things, go through this quickly, but cover some of the history of the museum and where we're going and what we've been, where we've been. So we call ourselves the museum that moves you because you can get on a train and move around there, and a lot of other activities as well that can take you around the site, car vehicle rides and that kind of thing. But let me see if I can get myself going here. All right, so we were the museum is located on what was Southern Railway's Spencer Shops complex, which was founded in 1896. It was located here because it was about halfway between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia on Southern Railway's main line. So it made it a very good place for the steam locomotives to come in, be serviced, and whether that was, short servicing of minor things like going in and out of the roundhouse quickly and back out for service, or if it was down to the point of having to have a major overhaul or rebuild done to a locomotive, that was done there as well. So it employed 2,000 or more people in its heyday here. And the site that we have now is about 60 acres. A lot of the buildings still stand. And so we actually have buildings that date back as far as 1896 that we use every day, which is pretty neat as far as I'm concerned. So
that's what I was going to say. Just looking at that shot, a lot of those buildings are still there. I mean, that roundhouse is amazing.
We do have we have 4 exhibit buildings currently that are open, but we have other buildings that are still under restoration that have not been open to the public yet, but some more that will come on board eventually with future projects. So again, when you walk through these buildings, there's a life to these buildings. It's
for sure
a lot to see. There's legends of people hearing and seeing things that from the past, ghost stories and all that go on with that too. So but it is a real significant place, and you can really feel that when you walk through, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So Spencer was also made famous in the old Wreck of the Old 97 song. The old 97 was a train coming to it was coming to Spencer, and it was running late, and so it was speeding, and it wrecked on Stillhouse Trestle near Danville, Virginia, on its way to Spencer. So if you hear the lyrics of the song, the old tale, they talk about you must put her to Spencer on time. We are the Spencer that they were talking about in that song. So we enjoy that tie-in as well. I guess I said 2,000, but more than 3,000 people were involved working at the facility, and that was locomotive overhauls, cars. There was a large rail yard behind, division point type rail yard that was behind the facility. There still is a small yard behind the museum now, but it's not used like it was. Most of that activity was moved north about 8 miles to Linwood, North Carolina, where a hump yard was built in 1979, and that yard is what made Spencer completely obsolete at that point. Needed more modern facilities and such. So in the process of trying to modernize, the folks at Spencer did go from overhauling steam locomotives to working on diesels. So they made a lot of changes to try to retrofit themselves to work on diesels, and you can actually see some of that going through the roundhouse now, where you have bays of the roundhouse that have elevated platforms where they built those up so that people could access the diesel locomotive instead of having to be down on the ground for working on the steam locomotives. So a lot of adaptation took place to make that try to survive as long as possible. But by the 60s, it was fading, and by the 70s, the facility was completely obsolete. So in September of 1977, Southern Railway at the time had donated part of the property, and then later more of the property, to the state of North Carolina. And in September of 1977, it was named as the state's transportation museum, to feature all the different inland types of transportation. Rail is a huge part of it, of course, but the story we tell goes beyond rail. So we're actually now in our 45th year. It's sometimes seems like a slow process, but it just to see a lot that's happened in those 45 years, it really is amazing. The building that you see, I'm trying to point like you can see me pointing at the screen, but the building you see in the larger photo there is what's called the Master Mechanic's office, where a lot of the clerical workers in that worked at Spencer. We still use that office today. So you can see historical pictures back from the 1900s. That building was built in 1911. Wow. You'll see old historical pictures of Southern Railway clerks and managers standing on the front steps of that building. And I walk up those steps every day when I go into work to pick up my mail and stuff like that. And I just think that's neat. So we're doing a lot of the same, in some ways, doing a lot of the same things that they did out of that building. So this is where we'll get into a little bit the support of the museum and so forth. In 1979, the state zoo was coming online. The Spencer Shops, or the Transportation Museum, was coming online. We needed a lot of money to get going, and we asked for $20 million at the time for appropriation. And we always like to say the elephants won over the steam engines at that point. So the zoo ended up with more money, but we ended up with $1.25 million a year appropriated out of the state budget. And that lasted until I guess the early 2000s, when things, as we'll talk about quickly, took a real dive. Because the budget cuts resulted in us losing a lot of that funding, and that's where we had to get creative and start doing some more of the activities that we do. So jump through the sad part. 1983, we had our first exhibit open. It's a very small exhibit. We've grown a lot since then. We had 33,000 people come through that year, and we're up to over 150,000 people a year now that come to the museum.
Wow.
Stop me if I'm just kind of rolling through this quick.
Oh, but take your time. I find this all fascinating.
Train rides started in the 80s. We had a diesel, well, actually steam and diesel at the time. The steam locomotive that's pictured here is the old Buffalo Creek and Golly number 4, which was redecorated as the Southern 604 for use at the museum. That's not here anymore. It's actually back in West Virginia, back home, and it will hopefully serve someday on the Durbin and Greenbrier. It's up there now, kind of back where it came from in the region. But we still do diesel train rides 4 days a week currently, and special event train rides sometimes with steam engines that are visiting and that kind of thing. Norfolk and Western 611 pays us a visit, fairly often, and some others as well. So we had auto exhibits. You see some of these old buildings. I mean, they were dilapidated in the old pictures that you see, and then now they're
it's came a long way.
It really has. And you walk through some of these buildings that were, a wreck back when this all started, and you see now what they are. It's quite amazing. So the roundhouse, that is where, if any rail fan at this point in today's world is probably looking for heritage units, chasing the Norfolk Southern heritage units. Yep. We were lucky enough to be able to debut those, which I'll talk about here in a minute. 20 of those locomotives all gathered around this roundhouse. But in 1996, it was overhauled and opened as our main exhibit building. So this building was built in 1924. I'm sorry. But on the 100th anniversary of the facility, the 1896 founding of the shops, we were opening that to the public. And so that was that was a really big treasure to be able to walk through that. I remember going through that building in the late 80s, early 90s, walking through with Jim Wren, who he knows, the editor of Trains Magazine, who passed away recently. He was one of our board members and a real huge asset to the museum, volunteer for years. He walked me through that building back in the late 80s, early 90s, and told me how incredible it was going to be. And the roof was falling in at the time. And I thought, you guys are crazy if you're going to, but it happened. It happened. So it's obviously the power of perseverance, I guess. So, Barber Junction Visitor Center. This building was located about 11 miles from the museum, out on the Norfolk Southern line that runs from Salisbury to Asheville. It was donated to the museum and moved here and became our visitor center in 1996. A story that we like to tell on that is when they moved the depot, they loaded it on a truck and had to cross the tracks with it, apparently, and the train had to stop for the depot to move to get across. So
That's awesome. What a beautiful station, just to
really
be able to save that. It looks like before it moved, it looked like it was in pretty rough shape.
It is, and it's still it's in great shape now. It looks just like you see right there, the yellow paint and all right now. But the railroad built a little brick structure there to serve as a station after this was moved from its original location. It was a location where two rail lines crossed, and they crossed right there at the bay window in the kind of the turret section of the building. But with downsizing, the need for clerical work and whatnot, they ended up opening up a smaller little brick building, and luckily it got saved and it came to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great thing. I mean, I see time and time again a lot of these old train stations and depots. They're either tore down or they're saved, or they're just sitting there, just slowly, falling apart. I'm so happy to see what the station looked like then, before it moved, and then now, just to be saved and preserved. I mean, that's so awesome.
A lot of it is liability for the railroads to have these old structures on their property. So, you mentioned before living here in Landis, North Carolina, which is not far from the museum. There was an old depot there that was restored and was a little small museum. They've actually just recently moved that off railroad property and made it into a park area. But I think that's kind of the key in some of these preservations, is to get these buildings onto property where they can be maintained, and that way the liability goes away for the railroad.
Yeah, totally.
Let's see. So Day Out with Thomas was featured here. That's one of our big events that we do every year, coming up in September and October. The back shop is another one of those buildings that was just absolutely, when the museum became the museum, it was overgrown with vines and so forth. You can see this 1997 picture even. Looks pretty rough inside, but in early 2000s, work started on getting the brick and windows redone and structurally sound, and but still the building wasn't open to the public because it didn't have fire suppression and all that. So it was basically a large storage unit for a long time. But we'll jump back to that in a minute. Now it's open to the public. So one of the things we dealt with was funding cuts. I mentioned, I'll jump through this quickly. This is part of our story, though. We went from about 1.2 million appropriation down to 300,000 a year in 2011, and it really became very critical that the museum generate revenue at that point. So we had to get people here, and so things got very creative, trying to have events and so forth to bring people out. And that's really what has kept us alive, is being able to put on all these things to bring people out and then to pay the bills. So it's a huge site, 60 acres and 13 or 14 historic buildings. So
yeah, I mean, to go from what you see there, from 1.2 million to $300,000, you've got to figure out a way to bridge that gap.
We had to start. I mean, we really the museum and the foundation together. So it's a state museum, as I said, state property. But there's a nonprofit group who I work for, actually, who does a lot of support for the museum, and we work together as if we're the same staff, even though our paychecks come from different places. We work very closely together, and we keep the museum running. But it becomes very critical that you get people there, and for people that maybe don't understand the whole workings of it, this enterprise fund that's mentioned here on this slide, what that means is when you buy admission to come to the museum, that's going to the state, but it's actually going to the state, but it's going to the museum itself. So it doesn't go back in the big pot in Raleigh where all the other funding would be for other, for other things. But it's if you're buying a ticket to the museum, your ticket price goes to the museum's bank account, and that's where that's where the money is spent from. So it does definitely benefit the museum, everything that's bought there for events or just daily visitation. But so our visitation kind of dropped significantly when we started charging. Of course, things were looking pretty rough, but then Wick Moorman and friends with Norfolk Southern really came along to save us in a lot of ways by having the Heritage event in the hottest days ever, I think, at the museum. We still call them Heritage Hot. It was extremely hot. It was up over 100 degrees that day, one of those 2 days, and July 3rd and 4th of 2012. 10 years ago now, we had 20 brand new locomotives out there painted in the predecessor schemes for Norfolk Southern, and that was a real huge event that we, by the way, put on in a very short period of time. We got word that they wanted to do it after kind of surveying different locations where it could possibly be done. They found Spencer. They knew about Spencer, but one of the big draws was that the public could come and see this, not just employees. And that before I guess they arrived at our location, they were looking at doing like an employee event, but also wanted to get the public. You can't invite the public into a rail yard, so you end up bringing them into a museum where you have 20 tracks or so that you can park 20 locomotives on and take a picture, and that's really what happened there. So it was very fun to see this take place because they basically, with the Norfolk Southern crews that were involved in this, they would take these locomotives, put them out one at a time on the turntable, spin them around, run them out, let people take pictures of them, bring them back in. It was like playing with model trains for 2 days, but they were, it was incredible. The Norfolk Southern was so supportive of this event, and it was a really great PR opportunity for them, and it really helped us get back on the map as far as being a place for people to come enjoy the railroad.
I mean, you think of it right now, this was one of the only times to see all 20 at the same spot.
That's right.
I mean, they're running, throughout the whole entire Norfolk Southern system. Sometimes they're running on some foreign railroads now, so some of them make their way up to the West Coast, but this was the opportunity to see every single one of them at one spot. I really wish I was there for that, because that must have been the most coolest 2 days. But as you said, it was extremely hot.
Heritage hot, we call it. So yeah, I was actually a volunteer at the time. I started working at the museum in 2016, but I had 20 years volunteering in before that, and it was an incredible thing to be a part of. So really very fortunate to have had that. We've always had a very good relationship. I mean, going back to the beginning, Southern Railway donating the land for the museum, and then Norfolk Southern supporting us as they have over the years. So we can't say enough about that support.
So awesome.
2 years later, speaking of support, it happened again, but now it was with older locomotives. So we brought vintage locomotives from all across the country. And there were, I think, 26 for this. So we did the same thing. And that was now we had more time to plan this because it kind of got, we got an idea and we ran with another version of it. And, after having very short time to plan the Heritage event, the Streamliners event took a lot longer to plan, and it involved the cooperation of other railroads too. So these engines came from all over. So we saw pictures of these things coming across BNSF and UP, and UP even brought one of their E units out. And Ed Dickens, who's in charge of the Heritage program there with Union Pacific, and of course with the big boy and everything, he was on site with this, and he was a great guy, great person to get to know. So this was another 4,000 person or so attendance event, and we had people from around the world that came to this. So it was another big opportunity for us.
Yeah, I mean, that's another awesome event. I mean, the great thing about it is, I guess, you know, from the first event, you kind of, you know, you learned a whole bunch of stuff. So when you hosted this event, and of course you had more time, was it
Hmm.
as, I'm sure it wasn't as hot as the Heritage Unit
It was
event.
a little cooler. Yeah, it was a little cooler, but it
Yeah.
was warm still, but it was a little bit cool. We all came around with some pretty significant sunburns, but yeah, this was what, a 4-day event. So it was, or a 3-day event. So it was quite a, quite a show too. And then the other thing we got to do with these is some of these other locomotives pulled our museum trains. So it was cool to see, the Burlington E unit, coupled to our train, the silver E unit there you see, or some of these others just pulling the train around. It was really, really neat to see. And of course, the 611 was there as well, but it wasn't actually restored at that point. It was torn down, starting to get torn down the day after the event closed.
Wow.
Okay, let's see. So for the families in the audience, Polar Express, Day Out with Thomas, those are huge events for us, and those are really the events that make the money for us to keep the museum operating. So um, this is the Polar Express is done in 50 or so places around the world now, and without that and without the Day Out with Thomas, the museum wouldn't be. I mean, it wouldn't be what it is today for sure, and questionably, would we even be here at this point? Because really, these things. This is what uh, really pays the bills. I mean, you bring families out, get kids interested. That's a big part of it. And then, of course, we like to put on the other shows that are rail fan related, or the other types of educational events and other types of transportation as well. But it's all a mix. A lot of museums have found that these kinds of events are what you need to keep yourselves, prosperous and moving. So.
Yeah, I mean, the Polar Express events certainly have a huge draw, you know, and it's from what I've understood from a lot of people, they said it's a great fundraiser essentially.
It is, yeah,
It
yeah,
get a lot of people in. This is a cool event, to be able to see all these fire trucks, you know, all in one spot, and then plus seeing some heritage painted units, you know, towards, you know, the public safety here in the
yeah.
shop, which is
You
awesome.
see your shirt matches the one on
Yep.
the turntable there. So,
Yep.
we've done this fire truck show for a few years now, and we get depending. Now the pandemic slowed it down a little bit. Of course, there were things we couldn't do at all during the pandemic, but bouncing back from that, still, and between the pandemic and the price of fuel, getting as many fire trucks out has been a little bit more difficult. But we still had about 70 this year. We just had that event this past summer, and it. It was not quite as large as the ones before, but 2019 really took the cake because Norfolk Southern and CSX both brought their units out to us, and we're not even on a CSX line. So these NS or the CSX units were actually just out of the paint shop, had just really debuted. The 1776 came along for the ride because they were at the time kept together and going on public appearances. And I reached out to a friend at CSX and at the time and just asked, hey, what's the chances? I thought I was going to get a no, and I said, well, I got a maybe. And when the next thing you know, we had it all together. So I think we had probably 6,500 people here for that. 6,300 it says for that event.
Yeah,
Fire
that is
trucks and for the locomotives.
that is awesome. You know, just to be able to, I mean, the CSX locomotives, of course, had to go across Norfolk Southern lines in order
Mm-hmm.
to get to the museum, and just all the coordination is just amazing in between these large events, whether it be the heritage units or, you know, this event or the other event with the historical locomotives. I mean, just to be able to pull those off is just awesome.
It's a lot of coordination, and it's definitely a lot of cooperation. And again, we can't say enough about the cooperation that we do get from the railroads. In these days, the railroads are having their own challenges with the supply chain and all just everything that's going on right now.
Mhm.
So things like that aren't necessarily as possible right now. So we always get asked, when's the next big event? Well, it's all going to depend on the day that comes that the climate is right to ask for these things again. But we're not idle and thinking about things. It's just that we can't always. You can't pull these off. Some of these big railroad events, you can't pull off bringing in 26 engines all at one time without the cooperation of the people that are going to move them. And so we're just in a different climate right now, but always thankful for the support that we get. And I think going on from here, just some of I'll run through these. We had property expansion recently. I bought a showroom and place for our truck and auto collection to get worked on.
Wow.
That's just down the road from the museum. So we've and we actually bought the bank across the street, which became our office building now, which helps us expand as well.
Yeah, I thought I recognized that building.
Yeah, that's the old bank that was across the street. That's where my office now is. But that's helped us kind of spread people out a little bit. People were, sharing 3 people to an office and that kind of thing, and especially. Now the way the climate is now, nobody really wants to sit on top of each other in a office environment anymore. So it helps to have the extra space. This yard office building is actually a combination of 2 or 3 different houses that were put together, and this is actually a historic building on the site. It was there at the shops, but it's now serving as our volunteer space. It's right beside the roundhouse. So it's another thing that we do that's just moving forward in all the different restorations and work that we're doing. And coming up very soon, needs to be updated actually, but this powerhouse building supplied the power for the facility at one time, and it was hit by a tornado several years back, and in 2015 it was stabilized and had some of the brickwork done and the windows and so forth done, but later, but we still haven't been able to use the building inside. So we've thankfully been appropriated a one-time appropriation from the state to get these buildings, this building and one other building, a car repair shed overhauled so that we can actually use those. This will become exhibit space and event space as well.
Wow, that's so great! Yeah. Just being able to restore a lot of the stuff that's on the property.
I think one of the things that we deal with, of course, just in the nature of what the place is, of course we want to restore. We'd love to restore every piece of railroad equipment we possibly could, but that all comes, with a price tag. But we also have all these buildings to take care of, and these buildings are as much the story as anything for where we are. So we always have to keep that in mind, that when we're prioritizing the work that has to be done, we've got to save the structures that are there. And we're very fortunate to have some really great old buildings. So we got upgrades that took place, and some of this I'll just jump through. That boxcar that's in the picture there, that is the 200,000th boxcar that was built by Pullman Standard in Bessemer, Alabama, and it was painted like that. And Microtrains and N Scale and a lot of the model companies have made, in different scales, have made a model of that. But here again, we reached out to somebody at Norfolk Southern when that thing was still running around in rusted paint, boxcar red paint, just graffitied up and everything, and just said, "Hey, this car is special. It should be saved someday." We didn't ask for it, but it was something that we thought needed to be saved someday. And thankfully, it ended up. It worked out. They donated it to us, and then we got it repainted. Volunteer labor did that, as well as one of our local short lines, the Aberdeen, Carolina and Western. We worked with them. They sent some of their people over to help paint and they masked these lines and everything to get them done. So another partnership that we have is, with those folks. But this building, the back shop now, I showed a picture of it crumbling before, but you can walk through that 90,000 square feet now. And it's just, in itself, it's a real, it's almost an exhibit in itself.
I mean, it's a massive building. I know that you're doing that restoration of the plane in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So crazy to walk into that. It's massive as it is, and then you see a plane inside the building. It's like, wow. I mean, this really sets everything to scale.
That was a big airplane back when it was first flying too, and now, compared to what we see now, it's very small. But yeah, to put it in perspective, a DC-3 is inside its building being restored, and it really looks small compared to that building.
I mean, there's still tons of room in the building. Yep.
So I don't know. I've got some of this is other just economic impact, some of the things. So I think I've reached kind of where we um, need to be. This is just quickly some of the things that we've done since the pandemic. When we had to close, we did some things to keep people coming,
That was
excuse me, as much as possible, but we couldn't have crowds there. So one of the
that was
things
a
that we did
cool
never
event.
thought we would ever be able to do is drive through this site and do Christmas lights, and we did it. So we finally
That
figured
was
out
a cool
where's the
event.
good way to drive through, and just creative thinking. We did it. So
Yeah, I actually participated in that. That was pretty cool.
oh, did you? Okay, great. Yeah, we had fun. So it was, again, we got to see people. They mostly didn't get out of their cars. They could go to the gift shop because at the time the restrictions in North Carolina were retail spaces could be open, but the bigger some of the other things that we do, the crowd gathering and all that couldn't happen. So we did the best we could, and thought it was pretty cool. So I think I don't really have a whole lot more on the slideshow that's of interest. So we've hit 30 minutes here, I think. So
Yeah,
I talk too much.
that's okay. That's fine. So I wanted to ask you, so the restoration of 611, a huge part of it took place at the museum. Is that right?
It did. So the work was not done by our people, but it was done in our facility. So the Virginia Museum of Transportation had workers that did the restoration work, but because we had the facility to do it indoors and had the roundhouse, had the pit in the roundhouse that they could pull the engine over, they selected us as the restoration location, and that is our one YouTube video that went viral years ago. Was the day that it went out for its first test run. Our development director at the time, hello Misty, if you're watching, she got up on the building and videoed the engine leaving, and that had in the millions of hits. So that was really a very very big day.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, asking. I'm sure they're asking you, when is 611 going to come back to the
Mm-hmm.
museum? I know that it spent some time in a couple of different parts of the country, and
Right. We get
and
that question a lot, but it's in Strasburg, Pennsylvania right now. They've just I think pretty much gotten close to finishing up with their inspection requirements that they had to go through. We haven't heard anything for this year. We always talk with the Virginia Museum of Transportation though, and if we can work it out, details of bringing it here, we do love to have locomotive here. It's just for this year we haven't heard anything yet because of all the work that they've had to do on it.
yeah, you guys, even still, have phenomenal events, throughout the year
Mm-hmm.
at the museum, which is great. It's always great to be able to go to the museum. And then when I was living in North Carolina, I was actually a member of the museum.
Oh,
So just being able to go in like several times in the year, just walking through, you always see something different. And you're always, there's always something that, walking through the first time, oh, I didn't see this, or being able to
mm-hmm.
spend a little bit more time at a certain exhibit. I mean, as you mentioned, the museum has got so many exhibits besides the railroad portion of it. I mean, there's a huge exhibit for aviation
Right.
and the automobiles. Like, are the automobiles, how did you guys get those? Are they people donate them, or how
Yeah,
did
they're
that work?
mostly donated. There's some that are on loan, but they are, I think, the bulk of them have been donated to the museum. And we've actually got one building that's dedicated to autos. It's the old flue shop building where they worked on the locomotive flues. We call that the bumper to bumper exhibit. And it's got some vintage scenes in there where the cars are parked in front of it. We have a Model R Ford, which is before the Model T. And our understanding is, I guess the Henry Ford Museum doesn't even have one of those, so they're very rare at this point. So
Oh, so
we
you
we're
guys
pretty proud to have that one. So we went there visiting one time, and they said they were very jealous of that car. So
that's
um,
pretty amazing. You guys
yeah,
have something that they
they have a
should
lot of
probably have.
things. They sure have a whole lot of things, but we do have that one. So
That is super cool. I mean, I can't say enough about the museum. I mean, it's so awesome to be able to visit it. And it's amazing, with 611, basically was there being, restored and overhauled. And that's what the facility ended up, it steam locomotives came in there to be,
right,
maintained. So it's very fitting that that locomotive is, there periodically to be checked on right there, as
that's
if
what we
it was.
always like to say is even though it's diesels for the most part now, you mentioned the 611 is a very good example, but in some cases, we're using the facility like it would have been used. It's actually our rail operations people do work inside the roundhouse just like employees would have, back all those years ago.
So, how many volunteers do you have roughly right now on staff?
Well, it varies. I would say right now we're probably still bouncing back on volunteers. We had some restrictions again because of COVID. We had some restrictions about how many could be there, and for a while none could be there. But active volunteers, I mean, we have different groups of them. I don't know that I could give you a number right off the top of my head, but we have them in the rail department that work on the equipment there. We have aviation volunteers that come out and work on that DC-3, auto volunteers that exercise the vehicles and fix them, and then we have our special event and interpretive volunteers that go around and give tours and just help out at all the events and that kind of thing. And so it's a very, very big volunteer participation at the museum. And that's one way, if people are watching and are interested, one way you could really support the museum is to lend your talents there, because it's, we always need help in all those areas. So don't just think it's just trains, because it is a lot trains, but there's other things too.
How else can people help the museum?
So you mentioned being a member. Membership is big for us. We do want to promote that as much as possible. The cool thing about membership is, for a lot of the families that join our membership, they can come out and bring their kids twice a year, and they've already paid for it. So it's not like buying a season pass to a big amusement park or something like that, where you've really got to go quite a few times to use it. You can go there and ride the train on normal event day or normal visitation days for free. You can tour the museum for free. You don't have to pay for that. You get discounts on some things. And plus you get, the electronic newsletter we sent out. You get discounts, in the gift shop. By the way, I'm drinking Cheerwine, which is a local soft drink. If you're from this area, Cheerwine.
I mean, the other thing that I remember when I was living out there is not only that, but you also have a Members Day as well.
We do. Yeah, we have a Members Day. We try to coordinate that usually try to do that with a train show that we do every year, model train show. And we also have an antique truck show that takes place at the same time. So the idea being that we bring the members out on a day that's really busy. It's really good for them to see it. Other ways, besides membership, is just in general fundraising. You can, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice.
Okay.
You can support the museum by making donations either to the museum's general fund, or you can support certain projects. If you're interested in rail, aviation, automobiles, you can, or just exhibits and things. You can designate your money to those things.
That is super cool. Well, I really appreciate you joining the program.
Sure.
And anytime that you're wanting to promote anything or come on, I'll be more than happy to have you on again. I mean, it's a phenomenal museum. I can't say enough about the North Carolina Transportation Museum. Where can our audience learn more about the museum?
If you go to our website, it's nctransportationmuseum.org. And we'll have our whole list of events on there and all the different things that we've talked about as far as supporting the museum and so forth is also on that website.
Well, Marcus, thank you so much.
I don't know why the voice is giving out here suddenly. I apologize for that, but thank you for having me on. It's really great to be here, and good to have the chance to talk to people. One of the things I think may get asked about is the Graham County 1925 Shay, which is the steam locomotive that Jim Wren was really very interested in, and one of his wishes was to see that locomotive run again. So, although before he passed away, of course, we couldn't promise him that it would definitely run again. We definitely are looking at the feasibility of whether it can run again. So we are currently accepting donations. If you designate your gift in memory of Jim Wren and for the 1925 Shay, we're collecting that money for the purpose of doing a feasibility study on the locomotive.
That would be
so. That's we'll have more news on that, and as people make donations to that, we're going to keep them updated as where we stand with the whole project.
I mean, that'd be so awesome to get that restored and running in his memory. I mean, he certainly contributed a lot to this museum. I mean, to the museum and also to the rail fanning community, just along with Trains Magazine.
That's right. I think all of us that are in preservation can thank Jim and the number of things that he did and the great supporter he was of all of us. So I think we all have that one common tie is Jim Wren was in our corner all the time. So
that's for sure. Well, thank you so much. I know you're starting to lose your voice, but
I don't know. Got a little tickle going on here, so
we'll wrap it up for this time around. But I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it very much.